Hello, my name is Swati, and I'd be talking about Deleuze's essay, How Do You Recognize Structuralism? At the outset, what I'd like to clarify is that my background is in literature, so this won't be an exercise in analytic philosophy. Rather, I try and explain some of the concepts from my position or my stand as a student of literature. So, structuralism as a movement formed the bedrock of linguistic analysis. That's a I think a safe uh, point to start with. Initially, it was designed as a mode of systematizing the study of language. So, as we discussed in the first class of the seminar, it provided a kind of methodological signposting to navigate through language and various other disciplines. So, later on, the principles of structuralist analysis were applied to other domains such as anthropology, such as in the work of Levi Strauss, in the psychoanalytic theories of Jacques Lacan, who claimed that the unconscious is structured like a language, and was also taken up by Michel Foucault in his very uh, unique understanding of epistemology. So he kind of renovated the concept of epistemology through certain structuralist uh, devices, such as his use of the term archaeology of knowledge, the order of things. So it was a mode of accessing epistemology, or it kind of brought in an element of scientific rigor to the study of history and epistemology. Uh, so, what Foucault tries to communicate is underneath the surface flux of history. He unveils certain signposts, which he calls archaeology of thought, that enable us to navigate through the vast landscape of events. Structuralism thus becomes a plane of cohesion, or it's something which helps us to connect disparate events or find some kind of a connection that enables us to better have a better overview of things. So what it is concerned with is to connect diverse strands of widely distributed events to arrive at some sort of a schema. But then again, we have to remember that this is not a very stable schema. It is a schema which is also in a state of continual flux and is contingent, dependent on circumstances, on positionality. In Lacan's psychoanalytic theory, the notion of we come across the notion of the symbolic father or the name of the father. And that is again, it kind of acts as an organizing principle, or a kind of, it provides a kind of direction in guiding the distribution of the libidinal economy of desire, or the libidinal economy of the unconscious, by mapping it within a triadic structure which Deleuze and Guattari would later identify as the mommy, daddy, me triangle, the familial triad. Uh, Anything and everything that cannot be explained by structuralist grid kind of falls in the abyss of the real, or the non-symbolized domain of chaos. Structure as a concept cannot be confined within the notion of a form. This is another point that DNG make, is that there is no kind of confining form that contains the elements of a structure. It rather, the elements spill across all formal boundaries, and they explore various combinatory possibilities, which again has an influence on has an impact on the formal organization. So the elements spill across formal boundaries, always foregrounding the atomic elements and their combinatory flux. So everything, what is I think an important point which D&G makes is the state of flux that characterizes the organization of elements which are in a kind of motion and which kind of experiment with different permutations and combinations. So there is no absolute empirical representation, there is no absolute structure, but rather certain patterns or certain combinatory possibilities which kind of keep on multiplying. So there is no rigid boundaries or outlines as far as a structure is concerned. Structure is what accords. So why bring in the philosophy of structuralism, and why is it relevant in as a device of interpretation or an interpretative framework? So basically it provides some kind of, it allows some kind of, it accords some kind of an intelligibility to a certain arrangement of elements, but the conditions of intelligibility remains contingent on subject positions. So basically everything is relative to the situationality of the structure. The kind of interpretive dynamics that is set into motion would depend on the specific locale, the context, and the mode of combination of these various constituent elements of the structure. Structuralism does not have an unchanging essence. So what you got to remember is there is no essential component of structuralism as a philosophical discursive field, and there are no representational absolutes in terms of an external criteria of interpretation. Structuralism is constitutive of a certain what Deleuze and Guattari, the term they use is a certain topology or a topos, which is again not a specific locale or a site, but a certain arrangement of the coordinates of experience. So this topology cannot be localized within temporal coordinates of experience, nor can it be stabilized and as an imaginative emplotment of space. So this is again not a very stable or absolute framework. It's a topology or a topos where various elements participate, and these various elements explore multiple combinatory possibilities. So that's what defines the changing texture of the topos. As a functionalist theory, structuralism is thus topological and relational. The important, I think, the term that we should keep in mind is the relational dynamics, and what kind of relational dynamics a particular topos sets into motion. The coordinates of the topos, so the framing, the framework of the topos is comprised of shifting coordinates. So that interpretation is also kind of is in a state of processual motion. So there is no stable interpretation. It's a process where we continually familiarize ourselves with the dynamics of the constituent elements of the topos. So the conclusion is structuralism does not conform to any absolutist notion of empirical human existence. Every structure activates a set of, another word, the Deleuze and Guattari, or forgive my pronunciation, I guess it's Guattari, or D&G. I think that's a safe way of mentioning their names. Every structure activates a set of differential relations where there is a reciprocity between the constituent elements. So another mode of intelligibility or understanding, or the activating the semantic context of a structuralist arrangement of elements is the differential relation between the component parts, where A is A because A is not B. So each domain constitutes a cluster of symbolic elements with singular points of convergence and interfaces. So each domain kind of activates a particular formation, or it sets up a particular dialogue or conversation between the elements. So that's what we are calling interfaces, or the kind of the way the elements converge or diverge. So that determines their dynamics of correspondence. Such singular points of convergence also indicate an actualization of certain relational structures, because there are n number of relational possibilities. So this kind of any actualization would be a partial realization of the multiple possibilities. Structures as modes of cognition remain embedded in the unconscious and allow a kind of intuitive access, because these are very deeply embedded modes of organization which kind of allow us to access any domain. So that's what I think I use the word intuitive. Intuitive, it allows a kind of intuitive access to the relational possibilities of a domain, their unique combinatory potential. Although we may identify moments of actualization of structuralist principles as material interfaces, there might be moments of actualization or material inferences that we can draw from certain combinatory principles, but these are, again, as I mentioned earlier, not absolute and may be supplanted by new possibilities. So there is always a partial actualization of the potential of any combinatory possibilities of the properties of a structure. The virtual or futural potential, so whatever is in excess of the actualized potential, always exists in the domain of the virtual or futural possibilities or futural potential of structuralism. This kind of exceeds any temporal mapping, where its potential remains real without being actual. Any actualization is thus always a partial manifestation of a structure whose momentum cannot be harnessed by any temporal configuration or emplotment. It is a repertoire or reservoir of virtual properties which cannot be quantitatively consolidated but carries infinite possibilities. So that is my brief overview of my understanding of Deleuze's essay, How Do You Recognize Structuralism? I think I have left out some of the other points that Deleuze discusses, but I hope to have a better understanding with the subsequent seminar lectures. Thank you.